The third proposal is on quota stabilization. I will give the floor to Matt to expound on this. Before I do, I just want to say this proposal in particular may cause strong emotions by some of you. If it does, do express them in a survey. Also keep in mind that our charge was to provide a whole spectrum of ideas from far left to far right, if you will, so as you eliminate those that you dislike, the final solution is something that you can have a peace of mind that you did not forget to think about something, or that you left some idea out there unexplored. So Matt, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Marin. I have headphones on with a little mic here to try to improve the quality. So if there is persistent quality issues, let me know. Okay, so this proposal G, quota stabilization. The idea behind this proposal was for us to investigate to what tools were available to quota holders to try to stabilize the quota system without having to go to the referendum process or without having to go to the legislature. Marin, Dino saying I'm having audio issues. Well,
okay,
perhaps it makes sense for you to take over.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I will present this instead of Matt while he resolves the audio issues. Okay. So in this particular proposal, what we are trying to address is we're trying to create an option for quota holders to self-organize. So without referendums, without petition, without legislation, to just self-organize and try to remove the risk of a petition crossing the threshold of 65%. And the way to do that would be to make sure that more people own quota. If more people own quota, if the quota ownership was not as highly concentrated as it is today, then the reasoning goes, more people would have the incentive to keep the system as is in place, and therefore the risk of a termination through a 65% referendum could be substantially diminished. Now, before we go into the details of how they would go about doing that, also keep in mind that this is likely not a feasible solution for any 51% threshold. So the chapter 3.5, you would have to redistribute so much quota that it doesn't make sense. And this is also not a panacea. This is not something that can prevent legislation. This is not something that can prevent any legislative solutions as well. So this is only going to, so if you do pursue this path, this is only going to be something that could potentially inoculate the quota holders against the 65% referendum, but nothing, in practice, nothing else. So how would you go about it? Well, you would try to find some sort of broad contract among either all or a vast majority of quota holders, where basically those that own a lot of quota as a percent of their milk or in total pounds, they would be asked to either give up or sell some of their quota at below market prices through an algorithm and through some sort of mechanism for figuring out who should be considered a privileged buyer of quota. You would want to target those that are either very close to becoming a cash flow positive with just a few more pounds. You would flip them from cash flow negative to cash flow positive, a quota holder, or those that, if you're going for a number of producers, those that are just don't have a lot of solids on fat shipped in the first place, so it wouldn't cost a lot of money to make them from net cash flow negative to cash flow positive producer as far as the QIP is concerned. One thing to mention also here is that this is a conceptual stage. The phase 2 is a conceptual stage. If you do advance this idea to phase 3, we would need to see what legal constraints exist around this idea so that it does not violate any cartel, collusion, price fixing, antitrust regulation that may exist out there. let's see. Another aspect of the solution, so in addition to redistributing quota from large quota holders to small quota payers or the near cash flow positive quota payers, the other aspect of this strategy could be to change the policy towards grade B by the dairy cooperatives, major cooperatives in California or others. If you could get more milk to go grade B, not necessarily a lot more, just a few more percentage points, then because grade B milk doesn't vote in any referendum, you would drop the threshold below 65% sufficiently to give a new wind to the QIP. As the risk of termination is reduced, the quota prices would also recover, maybe from 250 or 280 that they are right now, up to 400, 450. The quota price reflects the risk of termination. So if you reduce the risk of termination through this, the quota prices would recover as well. Now, we should add that grade B is a solution, quote unquote, that introduces also a lot of problems. If you plan to export dairy products, well, the importers really don't like dealing with grade B dairy products, and sometimes you cannot even use them. You use grade B, for example, there's a problem with whey from milk used in cheese. If the whey is grade B, there are severe restrictions where you can use that. Also, if you pursue this solution, this also makes quota from a producer problem into a processor problem. Right now, the processors are saying, okay, quota, right? Like that's a producer issue. What does that have to do with us? Well, if you pursue the grade B solution, then it does become their problem as well, because now they have to deal with more grade B milk. So we would be remiss if we didn't offer this as an option, but in general, be careful what you wish for. Let me see if we have another slide. We don't have another slide on stabilization. Before we move into Q&A, we would kindly ask if you could press next. And one more time. And this will take you to the document G, strategies current quota holders may utilize to stabilize the QIP without a referendum. There is a summary on top. And then again, the same questions as before, whether this proposal is fair, easy to understand. And even though this would not go on a referendum, we are asking you the same question. If this were to come on a referendum, would you vote for it? And what do you like about this proposal? How can it be made better? And other comments. If you don't like this proposal, that's where you could put your comments. If you like this proposal, you can tell us what you like about it in question 23. Like before, I'm going to open this now for surveys for about a minute and a half. So we'll continue at 11:51 Central Time. Okay, we will now open this for Q&A. I'm going to entertain questions on three proposals: on proposals to equalize RQA, to link quota payments to fluid milk sales, or to stabilize quota through a cooperative of quota holders, or pushing for more grade B milk. I see that we already have some Q&A questions, or maybe we answered all of them already. Those are old questions. Well, I don't see any questions. Dina, would you like to ask any questions? So it's not completely, okay, here we go. So the question was on proposal 3, why did you say be careful what you wish for? Expand on this. Yes, so the third proposal was quota stabilization through a cooperative or grade B. Perhaps the phrase was stronger than it needed to be. My hope was that if you, as quota holders, if you do decide to encourage dairy cooperatives or other processors to take more grade B in order to reduce the amount of pounds that are eligible to vote in a referendum, that you fully consider the consequences, not just for the probability that a quota would be terminated, which means reducing that probability, but that you also consider the implications on the image that California dairy industry would have both nationally and in the rest of the world as you export dairy products.
I don't have any questions. I think that proposal 1 and 2 are pretty straightforward. The only thing I would ask is maybe on proposal 3, the way that you have the quota co-op described in terms of redistributing quota in order to change the equation about votes, that doesn't actually require a co-op. I mean, right? People could potentially just do that as individuals and exchange quota between them. So, either way, it wouldn't require any sort of action.
That is correct. What we were trying to communicate, perhaps there was a better word to do that, but we were trying to communicate that any such collective action endeavors, there is always a free rider problem. In other words, if I had 100% of my milk covered by quota, and if I thought that there was a producer effort to stabilize quota through the redistribution, the best case scenario for me is that others do it, and I don't have to give up any of my quota, right? If I have to give up some of my quota, then, well, I lose some of the income every month. So whether it's a cooperative or some other type of contracting arrangement, there would have to be a binding contract so that this pursuit would involve a large, vast majority of quota pounds. It would be very hard for any one or single holder of quota, or even like a good group, the minority of the quota holders, to do this on their own, just because you need a lot of people involved in this. You would need basically almost everyone involved in this to make it work. And then of course there's also an issue. Even if you could change. Even if you subsidize and you allow someone to buy quota at below market price, because you will flip whether they're from cash flow negative to cash flow positive, and you change their incentives, the question still remains: how would you prevent them from selling that quota again? And that's an issue, because if you stipulate that in a contract, that may be considered vote buying. So they have to have a freedom to do what they want with their quota. So it's a fairly challenging idea to implement. We want to present it so that people would contemplate about it, but we would need to do more work in phase 3 if this is one of the ideas that advances.
However, it brings up an interesting idea, because I want to clarify something that you said earlier, because in the your summary of Donald's presentation, you said that if under chapter 3.5 it does not get enough votes to continue the program, that it terminates quota. And is that in fact the case, or does it just suspend the chapter?
The QIP, the standalone quota problem, will no longer be authorized, and therefore it would be terminated. The chapter 3.5 would be declared inoperative, but the pooling program would still be authorized under chapter 3. So it could theoretically be resurrected at some point in the future. For example, imagine a scenario in which a few years from now, US Congress decides that federal orders, federal milk marketing orders, are obsolete, and they will do away with them. And then California doesn't have it's not up to California producers to want or not want the California federal milk market order, but because the federal law is abolished, suddenly the state has no federal order anymore. Well, if you pursue chapter 3.5, it is my understanding that the authorization to resurrect the old 1993 order would be on file, and potentially could be resurrected as it was back then, without any additional referendums. Now, it's we would still need to understand like what happens to quota certificates, because presumably by then a number of people that currently own quota would have maybe been retired, and they wouldn't bother to resell that inactive quota certificate because at that point it had no market value. So does that revert back to the state? It's actually not clear. There's a potential for it to be resurrected without a referendum if the federal order is ever terminated. But it is far from clear how that would work. So at this point, it's a theoretical possibility, but it's not. The plan forward is not fully spelled out.
Because the question I don't think has come up, and correct me if I'm wrong, because if for example, thinking about this quota redistribution idea, if people took their valueless quota after a suspension of 3.5 because of the referendum, would it be possible for quota to be redistributed to a degree where they could call for another referendum to reenact the chapter?
Sure. I mean, I guess, we would have to ask Donald what happens to the quota certificates if the chapter 3.5 is suspended. If the quota certificates could still be bought and sold, even though any pooling program would be suspended at that point in time, then yes, theoretically you could, redistribute those quota certificates at perhaps at that point in time lower cost, because people may consider them, valued next to nothing, if at much, right? But it's a murky road, right? Like there's a lot of details that would have to be worked through before we know with certainty how that would work.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I see no other questions from the audience, so I think we'll just jump into the next stage.